come up to accept that. I'd like to welcome Allison Rand. She works in Milner Library, and she will be leading the session today, How to Avoid Academic Integrity Issues and Plagiarism. And I'm going to turn it over to her.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah, so my name is Allison. I am a instructional design librarian with Milner Library, and I have kind of my little area of expertise is academic integrity and plagiarism. So today we are going to be talking through academic integrity at ISU and what we sort of define it as here, and then we will go through sort of understanding broad concepts of plagiarism, and then I'll talk a little bit about some tips for avoiding plagiarism. And I have some sort of interactive slides and stuff today. We can do those or not, depending on sort of how people are feeling, but feel free to ask questions in the chat or just use the chat or anything to respond to anything we go over today. So first of all, I kind of want to ask the group, before we start to sort of jump into things, what do you think academic integrity is? What does that mean to you? How would you define it? And you can feel free to unmute yourself or tell us in the chat here. Any ideas? Okay. So through ISU, the academic integrity sort of policy is defined in the Student Code of Conduct. And the policy is that students are expected to be honest in all academic work. A student's attachment of their name on any academic exercise shall be regarded as assurance that the work is the result of the student's own thought, effort, and study. And so what this means is that basically when you turn in an assignment that has your name on it, that is sort of the contract between you and the instructor that the work that you're turning in is work that you have produced, that is your work, and that it is also for, it's the work that the professor has assigned you to do. And I'll talk about what that means in kind of a minute, but it's also worth noting that graduate students are generally held to a higher standard for academic integrity than undergraduate students. So it's important to know your what the definitions here are and what this means, and that essentially anytime you turn something in that has your name attached to it, you are assuring your instructor or your professor that that's your work and that you did it. So that kind of leads us to this idea of academic dishonesty. And this is where this idea of plagiarism comes in. And academic dishonesty is, we don't have a sort of really nice definition of it because it's a really broad term. It's an umbrella term that refers to a breakdown of trust between the instructor and the student, right? So we talked about how turning in your assignment with your name on it is that assurance, that's that contract, that's the trust between you and the instructor. And any breakdown of that trust is considered academic dishonesty. So that includes plagiarism. That also includes things like outright cheating or something like having someone else do an assignment for you or something like that. So anything that is sort of that breakdown of trust that goes against that contract of you attaching your name to an assignment can be considered academic dishonesty. And this is important to understand because when it comes to plagiarism and cheating and academic dishonesty and things like that, there are, some nice definitions that are sort of tied up all in a bow. But this idea of academic dishonesty can often be broader than people think. And a lot of times when students get caught, particularly with plagiarism, it's because they didn't know that what they were doing was a breach of this academic dishonesty. So just keep that in mind as we move forward, that it can be sort of a broader term than you might sort of initially think. So that sort of brings us to this idea of plagiarism, right? And what is plagiarism? And again, sort of really broadly, This is using someone else's words or ideas and passing them off as your own. And so the thing that this sort of brings up is that in most instances, when people think of plagiarism, I think, things like copying and pasting information from the internet and putting it in your paper without a citation. Obviously, that's considered plagiarism. But something can be considered plagiarism if you read it in a book somewhere and you use that notion from the book that you read in your work without citing the book, even if you didn't use a direct quote or something like that. That can be considered plagiarism. And plagiarism is a subgroup of violations of academic dishonesty. So while plagiarism is always cheating, you can cheat in ways that are not plagiarism, right? So using a calculator on assignment where a calculator isn't allowed is cheating, but that's not plagiarism. So there's some overlap here, but there's a little bit of a difference. Not all cheating is plagiarism, but all plagiarism is cheating. And so that's kind of how to kind of define that, I guess. And I say that plagiarism is a subgroup of violations because, again, there's not like one thing that is just the thing that plagiarism is. It takes many different forms. And so I'm going to go through a few different examples here of what plagiarism is and what it can look like. So is it plagiarism? Having someone else write a paper for you or buying a paper online? Yes, this is considered plagiarism. Having someone else write a paper for you. In some ways, I guess you could do this without it being plagiarism if you told your instructor someone else wrote this paper for me when you turn in the paper. But if you pass off someone else's work as your own, whether they wrote the paper for you or you bought a paper online over the internet or something like that, it may be that like everything in the paper is cited correctly. It's a pristine paper. It's well written. All your citations are perfect, but the act of turning in a paper that someone else wrote is considered plagiarism because it's not work that you produced. Copying parts of a friend's work, including things like coding and formulas. This is one that some students can get tripped up on, and that comes up in disciplines that are maybe not so research heavy or like essay or paper heavy. So in areas like maths and science and as things like computer science, this comes up a lot because there are different forms of what we would consider to be plagiarism. And if you were expected to write the code for something and you and a friend worked together and you ended up both producing the same sort of parts of code, that can be considered plagiarism because it's the same kind of idea as when you are turning in a paper, right? So that you should be producing this work on your own. You probably wouldn't, you might like have a little study party where you work with your friends and you're all working on your same paper, but you're probably like not all going to be doing this, writing the same words together in your paper. And while I think sometimes this is a little bit murky because things like coding and formulas, a lot of times there's only so many outcomes with how many, with ways that you can produce this information. But it's important to recognize that you're still expected to do that work on your own. And I have seen students who have gotten sort of caught up and received academic dishonesty violations for things like having someone else help them with their coding and their formulas and things like that. So it's a little bit tricky, but just remember you're expected to, unless it was assigned as a group project or something like that, you're expected to do this work on your own. And so while you may receive help, you don't want to be copying parts of other people's work, even if the sort of limited outcome might be similar or the same. And this brings us to the next point, which is working with a classmate on an assignment that's not a group or team assignment. And this is something that I think does not happen as much at the undergraduate or the graduate level, so much as it happens in like K through 12 and especially high school level. Although I do still sometimes see it with undergraduate students, but working with a classmate on an assignment that's not a group or team assignment. So say your instructor assigns you 10 math problems to do for your homework to turn in that week. And you and a couple of friends decide that you're going to divide them up and you're going to do the first 3, and then someone will do the next 3, and then someone will do the last ones. And then you just sort of rotate your papers. And so that is considered plagiarism because you are essentially, again, taking work that's not your own. And while this is an outcome where Again, there's sort of like limited outcomes for something like a math problem. You know, like if you get the answer right, you get it right. And if you get it wrong, you get it wrong in most cases. Doing that and sort of splitting that work and dividing it up is going to be considered academic integrity violations. It's going to be considered plagiarism here. So again, that's important to keep in mind. I think, again, this is sort of a less common one that comes up, but it is still something that we see depending on the discipline or the subject area, that this is still very much an issue. And the last one is, I think this is the last one on the slide, but using quotes without giving credit. So again, this is what people think of when they think of plagiarism most of the time, is that they, you know, they're doing research for their paper and they find a great article and they use a quote from that article and they don't credit the author. And that's considered plagiarism. That's sort of the most straightforward version of plagiarism that I think people think of, right? Because if plagiarism is using someone's words or ideas without giving them credit, this is sort of the most straightforward version of that, is directly using someone else's words without giving them credit. So, okay, there's one more on here, referencing someone else's work without giving credit. And again, yes, this is considered plagiarism. And again, this is one that's a little bit murky because the rule for plagiarism that comes up a lot of the time is if it's common knowledge, then you don't need to cite it. But what's considered common knowledge might be different depending on the field or you know, the subject, even the level of the class. What's common knowledge in a 100 level class is going to be very different than what's common knowledge in a 300 or a 400 level class in that same subject area, right? So say, like, you know, if you sort of have this background knowledge that you sort of think everybody in your discipline or in your subject area is going to have, then sure, you can go without citing it. But if it's something that you know, you're sort of citing a previous work or, you know, a book that someone wrote that's sort of a foundational text or something like that, it's better to err on the side of citing them and giving them credit than to not do that. It's incredibly rare that you're going to be penalized for oversighting information. So even if you don't directly use quotes, or even sort of paraphrasing words, if you're referencing a previous work or you know, a previous sort of existing notion or idea, you should always give credit for that. So the next thing I want to talk about is kind of going a little off in a different direction. So are there any questions so far about this sort of these examples of plagiarism or the definition of plagiarism that we've talked about so far? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions, but again, feel free to put those in the chat at any time if you do. So the next thing I want to mention is these essay writing services. And you may have run into these before if you are on Facebook or Twitter or any kind of public social media service and posted about like, ugh, I have an essay due and I don't want to write it. A lot of times you'll get responses from these bots that are, you know, like, oh, we can provide you with a plagiarism-free essay. And so it's these websites like essaypro.com is one of them, but there's lots of these out there. And it's interesting because they sort of tout that they can give you a plagiarism-free essay, that like they can make your, you know, do a plagiarism-free essay for you. But the use of these services at all is a violation of ISU's code of academic integrity, right? So if you think about what we consider to be plagiarism and ISU's definition, it's that you're sort of saying that what the work you turn in is your own. And so using any of these services is considered plagiarism. It's interesting because on their websites, which this is a screenshot from their website, they say, you know, we're strongly against cheating, plagiarism, impersonation. We will not take tests and quizzes for a student. They're not intended to be forwarded as finalized work. They're only strictly meant to be used for research and study purposes. We do not endorse or condone any type of plagiarism. But these disclaimers are essentially to protect them, not to protect you. if you as a student take one of these essays that they have written and you turn them in, that is considered plagiarism, academic integrity violation. That's considered academic dishonesty. They have these sort of disclaimers so that if a university comes to them and says, you're writing essays for all of our students, we want to sue you, they can say, well, no, on our website, it says we don't do that. And if your students are turning these in as final work, that's not on us, that's on them. So just, I just throw this out there because these are like really ubiquitous. They're all over the place. And I think a lot of times students don't think that professors know about them. But we do know that these exist. And, you know, it's pretty easy to tell when work comes from a place like this. And so I really, you know, it's important to understand that they may say it's plagiarism free. They may say that like they can write a great paper, but it is still plagiarism. It is still a violation of ISU's Code of Academic Dishonesty. So I just want to sort of point this out here because you really can't talk about plagiarism online without running into one of these. So I just want to throw that out there. So I kind of also want to talk about why plagiarism happens. And there's a study that was done about academic dishonesty and plagiarism. And in that study that they did, almost 60% of students who were caught plagiarizing didn't know that what they did was considered plagiarism. They thought that what they were doing was in the clear, that they were good. And I bring this up not because I want to scare anybody that like you might be accidentally plagiarizing, but one of the most common reasons that plagiarism happens is it's not intentional, it is accidental. And so the ways to sort of help that, I'll talk about in a minute to avoid plagiarism, but you should just be aware that plagiarism doesn't always happen with ill intent. Plagiarism often happens because of things like disorganization and time constraints and other like external pressures. I think disorganization is a big one because you might be writing a paper and you found this great quote and you wrote the quote down, but you didn't write down where it came from. Or you wrote a concept down in your notes and you didn't write down where that concept or idea came from. And you incorporate that into your paper, you go back, you can't find where it came from, and so you just don't cite it. And something like that is considered to be plagiarism because, again, you're still not citing those concepts, but that's not something you did out of ill intent or trying to deceive anybody. It's just a sort of a side product of disorganization. Also, time constraints are a big one. We see when students do intentionally plagiarize, some of the reasons they do it are often because they have run out of time and they just need to get something done. They need to fill a word count, something like that. And so they decide to copy and paste something from the internet. That's a big reason. And so that's why things like organization and time management are sort of the biggest ways to help yourself avoid plagiarism, because those sort of external factors are lessened. And when those external factors are lessened, we see plagiarism crop up a lot less. So that's kind of something worth mentioning. The other thing that we run into a lot is students not understanding what counts as plagiarism. And this is kind of the purpose of this presentation and this workshop, and why I spend so much time talking about different ways, different forms that plagiarism can take. Because a lot of times when I'm talking to students and I'm doing a consultation and we're talking through their research or their essay or something, they don't know what they need to cite and what they don't. They kind of think if it's a direct quote, I need to cite that. And anything else, as long as I have it in my like bibliography, my references at the end of my paper, then I'm good. But this is not really the case, So if you have a reference in your bibliography at the end of your paper, that means you used content from that bibliography or from that reference in the content of your paper, right? So somewhere inside the paper that should be cited. So that's kind of just something to point out as well, that like this idea of not knowing what counts as plagiarism is often a big factor in why students plagiarize and why it's often unintentional. So how do I avoid plagiarism? The big one again is to learn more about it, learn what's considered plagiarism, learn what your instructor's standards are for plagiarism and academic integrity. From the instructor side of things, it is up to, on our side, it's up to the instructor to communicate with their students what their expectations are for things like citations, and for things like what types of assignments require what types of citation and references and things like that. If your professor or instructor has not communicated these expectations, you can always ask them if you're unsure what is being expected. So, for example, if you're in a class that requires you to do like posts in a ReggieNet forum or something like that, does your instructor expect those posts to be just like personal reflections, or does your instructor expect those posts to contain citations and original research? And this is something that hopefully your instructors are making clear, but sometimes they don't. And so it's important to know what's expected of you and communicate with your instructor if you don't. If it's still unclear, I recommend talking to a librarian. I am always happy to talk with people about what expectations of plagiarism and citation and things like that are. Sometimes instructors communicate this in a way that is unclear to their students, and talking with a librarian and sitting down with maybe your syllabus or your assignment sheet or something like that, we can often help you kind of understand what your instructor's expectations are if they've presented it in a way that's unclear. And you should also be aware of what the stakes are for your assignments. By this, I mean, is it worth it to plagiarize, essentially? I recently was reading a case of a student who had something that, an assignment or something that they needed to complete. They felt a lot of time pressure to get it done. They couldn't get it done in the time that was allowed. And so they plagiarized and they turned in a plagiarized version of the assignment. The instructor caught them. They got caught plagiarizing. They went through this was not at ISU, but they went through their university's sort of process for academic integrity violations. And as a result, not only do they fail the paper, but they drop a letter grade in the class. As a result of that, they were failing the class. And then so they had all of these repercussions from, things like financial aid and eligibility for sports and things like that. So in that case, it was probably would have been better for the student that they just turned in a half-done assignment than they turned in this plagiarized assignment. So that's what we mean by be aware of the stakes. Is it better to just take the 5 points off for lateness and give it an extra day and complete it yourself? Or do you want to risk that sort of way, much bigger risk of not only excuse me, losing points on the assignment, but also any further repercussions from there on out, right? So, on top of that, some of the tips for avoiding plagiarism. Number one, the biggest one that I'll always say is start assignments early. And I know that every instructor in every class you've ever taken will tell you that this is what you should do, that you should start their assignment earlier than you think. But it's really true. Time management is a really critical skill, and it is a huge factor in why students end up plagiarizing. If you haven't already, the Visor Center, which is in the basement of Room and Hall, provides many workshops, including, this is a similar workshop that I give to the Visor Center, but they also have workshops on things like time management and organization. And so if this is something you struggle with, there are resources on campus that can help you out. And, sometimes assignments are what we call scaffolded, and they have clear steps and deadlines along the way, especially like those big research paper assignments. And that can be really helpful to making sure that you're on track and you're not falling behind and going to be suddenly crushed with work. But if that isn't the case, it can be really helpful to create your own check-in points to make sure that you're not waiting for the last minute. And whether you do this with an advisor or a faculty member that you're working with, or even with just a peer, to sort of check on with each other and provide each other a timeline. This was something I did in grad school all the time, where we had these big assignments that we would have to do for the whole semester. And I'd go to someone I knew in my class and say like, hey, like, can you like make sure, can you talk to me like mid-semester? Can you talk to me in a few weeks and ask me how I'm doing on this, just to keep myself accountable? And this can be really helpful, sort of creating those deadlines. If you're a person who likes to use a planner, you can sort of plan it out week by week or something like that. If you prefer to sort of just have it, if you don't want to like have an external accountability buddy, you just want to put it in your own calendar, that can be really helpful. But sort of knowing how much time you're going to take is really important for making sure that you don't run out of time and you're time crunched, because that's when we see things like messy citations that you can tell the person tried, but they ran out of time. And so they're going to end up with issues with plagiarism because they just simply ran out of time to clean up everything they needed to clean up, to get all their citations in order, all of that kind of stuff, especially for these bigger projects. The other big thing I recommend is getting organized. And this can be in whatever form you prefer. Some people, I knew grad students when I was in grad school who like printed out every single article that if they were working on a paper, anything they were using in their paper, they printed out every article and they highlighted it so that they knew exactly, they would take notes on the papers that they printed out, highlight all those things to know exactly where all of their quotes and citations and things came from. They were more organized that way. Some people use note cards. My sister has like this really elaborate note card system where like she uses like the bigger note cards for every source and then smaller note cards for every quote from that source. And then they're color coded and it's like a whole thing. That doesn't work for me personally. I just am a person who uses like a word processor or like a Google Doc or something like that and just takes notes in there and keeps it organized that way. Whatever works for you. That's what's most important, is to find a method that works for you. One thing that a lot of grad students find to be really helpful is getting settled with a citation management software like EndNote, Zotero, or Mendeley. And these are all citation management softwares that we support at Milner. There are more out there than just these three, but these are the three that we support at Milner. Personally, I use Zotero as a citation management software. If you've never used one before, essentially what a citation management software does is it streamlines this research process for you. So when you are writing a paper or you're doing research or something like that, or even just doing homework, you install a software on your computer. It has a little browser extension. So if you're reading an article in one of Milner's databases and you're like, I want to use this in my paper, all you have to do is click the browser extension button, and then it will add all of the citation information to your library, often including the full like text PDF of the article if it's available. So then all you have to do when you go back, it's way easier to find your sources. You just have everything in a library. You can organize into folders, things like that. Some of these even have, like Mendeley has a built-in PDF reader where you can highlight quotes and things like that. So it's really sort of taken these ideas like having a note card system or a print and highlight system and made it more streamlined for a digital age. I really think these are super, super helpful tools. And like I said, we support these at Milner. If you want to meet with a librarian to sort of get one set up, they can be a little bit of work to get set up, but once you have them set up, they are super helpful. Most librarians are happy to talk you through it, make these appointments. I'm more than happy to talk you through it. We do also have a workshop on citation management softwares and Zotero in particular through the Visor Center. So if you are, yes, they're free. At least Zotero and Mendeley are free. EndNote may have a paid version. Zotero in particular is free and open source. Mendeley is free and paid for by publishers. So I think they're super great tools. If you're interested, again, we have a workshop through the Visor Center that kind of gets you like on track and set up with Zotero specifically. And I'm happy to find the like, I'm not sure what the dates are on that, but I'm happy to find it and let people know if you're interested, or you can make a personal appointment with a librarian. And essentially, the purpose of all of these are, whether you do Zotero or Mendeley or whatever, or you print and highlight, keeping track of your research makes your citations easier. It's easier to know where your information came from. It's much harder to like lose track of information and notes and things like that. I know that like when I have been researching before, especially like back in high school or even when I was an undergrad, like you'd write things down and you just be like, that's a great quote, but like, I don't know where it came from. And you just sort of throw it in there being like, maybe I thought of that. And it's like, you didn't think of that. That's from somewhere else. But it just makes sort of this whole process streamlined and easier. And I hear from so many students that like something like Zotero is a game changer for their research, not only for like citation and keeping track of all of that, but for speed and organization. And it just makes your life a whole lot easier, I think. Zotero is amazing. Yes, I cannot like speak highly enough of how much I really love using Zotero. So one of the last things I want to touch on is plagiarism checkers, because I often get questions about these both from faculty and from students. And probably the most common one is turnitin.com, but there are other ones. And what they are touted as doing is that they can be used by instructors to check essays for plagiarism. So essentially the student will turn in their essay through Turnitin, and then the professor gets a copy of the essay and also a report from Turnitin, and the report will tell the professor how original the paper is or how much is plagiarized. I am not a fan of these. I do not recommend using them. They are often inaccurate and they can cause more problems than they solve. I think they're often used sort of more as a shortcut for instructors to grade than anything else. Although I do get asked by, like, I have been asked by students like, hey, can I use Turnitin to like double check my citations and check my paper or something like that? And I do not recommend using it for that reason. The reasoning for that is that when you submit an essay to Turnitin, it's added to their database forever. So any subsequent essays that are turned in by anyone anywhere are going to be checked against your work, which also means that if you submit excuse me, if you submit an essay more than once to Turnitin, it's automatically going to come back 100% plagiarized. I have seen this time and time again from students who think like, oh, I'll submit this to Turnitin for, to make sure I'm like good. And then they get like a 34% plagiarized report or something. And so they like try to correct it and then turn it in again. And then it comes back as 100% plagiarized. So I just include this because people tend to ask about these types of services. I don't think they are very well developed. And frankly, they bring up a lot of questions about student privacy and things like that, because if student essays are held forever in these databases, it's not very transparent to the students that that's happening. So even if you're curious about these types of services, I kind of recommend staying away from them. Just because I don't think they work very well. And frankly, I think you're probably better off like giving your paper to a friend to read over than using something like Turnitin to check your essay for plagiarism. So then that kind of brings us to like the big question of like, why does it matter? And the reasoning for this is like really sort of multifaceted. In your field, you'll have to know how to attribute research and other work, no matter where you work. If you end up in academia, obviously you're going to have to be like writing papers and doing research and things like that. But even if you are in a different type of environment, you're still going to have to know how to attribute other people's work to what they're doing. This is a really important skill to have. Because again, if you did the work, you would want credit for it. You would want to make sure that anyone is crediting your work to you, regardless of if it's a paper or a PowerPoint presentation, anything like that. It's really important to know how to attribute research to, whether it's other people in the field or like your immediate coworkers even. You're going to be expected to do this no matter what field you end up in. It may not take the form of a formal citation or a formal references page or bibliography or something like that. But you're always going to be expected to sort of attribute other people's work to them, as well as taking credit for your own work. And giving credit in a lot of ways, it shows respect to the original author. It also is really important, frankly, to academics. Having your work cited, if I wrote a paper and other people are citing my work, that makes me look better as an academic. And that can contribute to things like promotion and tenure and things like that. And so it's not just sort of respect, it's also like often has really tangible benefits to authors and creators. There was just a really interesting sort of debacle that I saw recently where an academic had put their some of their research on their Twitter account and was sort of doing a non-academic sort of presentation of their research, which was on Indigenous studies, and they were an Indigenous author, and they put this information up there, and then some folks who were writing an academic paper took those tweets and incorporated that information into their paper without citing the original author. And so it turned into sort of a huge debacle where the paper was retracted because they didn't cite correctly. And it just really sort of turns into a mess for everyone involved. So it's not just about, respect and credit, but also like giving credit where credit's due with the people who did all of that work. So I just want to sort of mention that because it's this stuff happens all the time, even beyond like the sort of world of getting graded and turning in a paper for a grade and things like that. It's really important to know how to do this just as a practice. And also sort of tying into that, plagiarism has these real life stakes. Joe Biden's first presidential campaign in 1988 failed due to a plagiarism scandal. He was found to have several speeches that were plagiarized. I know that this has come up, speech writing plagiarism has come up recently in politics as well. And this kind of stuff has like really high stakes for those people. I've also seen plagiarism scandals within podcasting and true crime and stuff like that. And, it's really messy when that stuff happens. And so it's really important to know how to do this as a practice and sort of incorporate citation and giving credit where credit's due as a practice into your life and your career, whether or not you're going to be an academic or, sort of a less formal citation field, but it's always important to give that credit where credit's due. Yes, and thank you, Noelle, for sending a link to the Visor Center workshop. Yes, it's called Easy Breezy Bibliographies. There's one today and one on the 9th. Yes, those are all, I think, over Zoom. And you'll want to have an actual laptop because it involves like installing Zotero and getting it all set up, but super helpful. Thank you, Noelle. So that brings us to our other resources and kind of the wrap up. So as always, if you have lingering questions, you can make an appointment with a librarian, myself included. You can chat with a librarian online through our chat service. You can walk in. Obviously, we're here in person now, so you can come into the reference desk, ask us in person. The Visor Center has tons and tons of resources from the workshops that we do with them to their own workshops to drop-in writing assistance. That's held in Milner often. So if you have a paper that you feel like you want someone else's eyes on to make sure that it's in good shape, you can go to that drop-in writing assistance and they can help you with that. And plagiarism.org is a really great resource that has lots of examples of plagiarism. So if you're still unsure, you're like, I don't really understand, like, what about like citation of ideas or paraphrasing or something like that? Plagiarism.org has tons and tons of resources on that kind of stuff. So that is all that I have for you all today. Are there any lingering questions or anything like that?
A question came in on the chat. If the Visor Center has drop-in writing assistance at the graduate level, the Visor Center does not, but we have a one-on-one writing tutor through the graduate school, and you can find them through the Visor Center. Actually, I'm going to drop her appointment link right in the chat if you give me a moment. But you can find her on Achieve. It's like an appointment setup, but it's on the graduate school resources ReggieNet site that we have for writing assistants. And so you can make appointments with her directly, and she can give you some tips there. And this is a question maybe for you, Allison. How do you reference a blog post?
It depends on the style of citation. Excuse me. Most of the time, you reference a blog the same way that you would cite any other website. So if you have if you know how to do a web citation, like just citing a regular website, same thing for a blog, unless it's some kind of other weird, a blog through like another news organization or something like that, like those. But generally speaking, you just cite it as a website. Registration for the Zotero workshop isn't working. Angel, are you talking about the one for today or the one for the 9th?
I went to the link where you're supposed to be able to register, and that's giving an error message. So then I put it in Firefox to see if it was just the browser, and it's still giving an error message.
Okay.
I'll give you a different, well, it's coming up.
I know that the Visors sign up stuff only lets you sign up a week out. So if you're trying to sign up for the one on the 9th, you won't be able to yet. You have to wait until a week before.
Now I was actually looking at the one for today.
Okay. In that case,
Probably too soon. Well, no, it actually, so it's the actual registration system that's not working. So I think it tells you to register, go to this link. And so it's the actual.
It's coming up as an error for me too.
Okay.
Okay, I will, when we wrap up here, I'll get in touch with them and let them know. And
Okay.
I can, the person who's doing the workshop is next door to me, so I can talk to her and have her send you a link if you're interested.
Yeah, that would be great. I use
Sure.
Zotero now, but it's a few things that I just don't know that I would love to have some questions answered with.
Yeah, I'll send you an email when we're done today, Angel.
Thank you, Allison.
No problem. All great questions.
Well, I did go ahead and put the link for the one-on-one writing support appointments for the grad level in the chat. And I just wanted to thank Allison again for taking her time today to give us this workshop. She's a great resource, so if you have any questions, I'm sure she wouldn't mind if you reached out to her. Have a great day, and as always, if there's anything that the graduate school can do to help or help you connect with some resources, please don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll talk to you all soon.
Thanks, everybody.